Welcome to the third episode of the Your Body Has Your Back podcast.
We are so excited to be here.
So excited, and let it be known again that it is almost 5:40 p.m. and we are just starting this recording after having gotten together hours ago, and this seems to be the story of the podcast recording.
Yes, we are both very much creatures of the morning in terms of when our brains are firing and all this, so who knows what's going to come out. So strap yourselves in.
And I just have to put it out there that we just spent almost an hour trying to figure out microphone issues that turned out to be a simple unmute situation. But here we are, and we are going to dive into our third episode. But first, we actually wanted to check in with you guys. The last two episodes, we really covered a lot. We covered a lot of ground. We really dove into a lot of specifics with the fundamentals, action steps. And we wanted to just check in and kind of see how you guys are feeling. Abby and I were having a conversation the other day around the fact that, in practice, we have the luxury of guiding one-on-one clients really, really deeply in terms of helping them to prioritize where to start, helping them to navigate, building really supportive habits in a methodical way that does not feel stressful or overwhelming. But we very much recognize that you guys are not working with us, one-on-one, and you're taking in all of this information and possibly navigating where to start.
The temptation could be to start everything all at once. And that is sometimes where we can see people get incredibly overwhelmed and really kind of fall off on some of the practices that they really had all the best of intentions, but just too much at once. So we want to help to give you guys some guidance to say, where would we help to prioritize with all of the things that we've covered in the last two episodes? These are the top three things that we really would want to be prioritized in a client if we were working with them, or you all as listeners.
Hey, Jillian here. I just wanted to pop in to remind you to check out my self-paced nutrition course, Eat to Heal Your PCOS. If you're a woman struggling with PCOS and you're dealing with all the unpleasant hormone symptoms like acne, irregular cycles, head hair loss, weight gain, and more, this course is for you. Eat to Heal Your PCOS was designed to help you discover simple and effective nutrition strategies to balance your hormones and to start resolving your PCOS symptoms naturally, without unnecessary restriction or cutting out foods that you enjoy. Building a supportive foundation with your nutrition and knowing how to confidently fuel your body for balanced hormones is the number one place to start for healing your PCOS. So if you haven't checked out the Eat to Heal Your PCOS course, you can find it in our show notes, or you can go to jilliangreaves.com to check it out. You can also take our free PCOS blood sugar imbalance quiz, which will help you to determine if this is the right course for you. So if you listened to the last couple episodes and you felt like, oh my gosh, I have all of these things to work on, the first three things we'd recommend thinking about or starting with are breakfast. So prioritizing a well-rounded, ideally protein-rich breakfast within the first 1 to 2 hours of waking every single day. If you are not eating breakfast currently and meal timing is super erratic, we don't encourage you to dive into the weeds with, some of the things we were talking about with fiber and micronutrients and minerals and all the things. Those things are incredibly important, but we, again, really want to be methodical about how we support the body and build that foundation. So if you're not eating breakfast or meal timing is erratic, start there.
Our second guide would be really optimizing protein. So in certainly that breakfast that now we're going to start really thinking about first when you're planning that meal or digging through the fridge or the cupboard, kind of figuring out, all right, what are my protein sources, be it animal proteins, plant proteins, and really put those as the central point to what you are putting on that plate. If we can get 20, 30 grams of protein at breakfast and each meal, that really is going to help to tie down blood sugar, which is everything that we dove into last episode. But that is a huge piece of priority for when you're planning your meals, certainly around breakfast.
And then lastly, light exposure, specifically starting off with some light exposure in the morning. We talked a lot about circadian rhythms and how circadian rhythms really run the show in the body and kind of impact how things operate on, really systemically. So circadian rhythm, super important, all sorts of strategies you could dive into. But the best place to start is with a strategy like morning light exposure. If you're not getting morning light exposure, that's going to have a ripple effect on a lot of things throughout the rest of the day. So if you recognize that there's some opportunity there for you to get some light exposure, or even to use sun therapy lamp, full spectrum light box, if you're someone that wakes up in, when it's dark, that would be a really excellent starting point.
I like those three.
Me too. Those feel like good starting points. And as always, none of the things that we recommend in this show should ever create more stress in your life. And if you are feeling stressed with pursuing some of these things, it's just a good opportunity to take a pause, reevaluate, and to consider how you can simplify. And on the topic of stress, that brings us into our episode topic for today.
We're talking about stress, people. So stress is a triggering word today for many of us, and it can feel like the list of things we stress about are events and topics that we don't have direct control over. So this can make stress feel like a giant ominous cloud that just perpetually hovers over our head. And on top of that, the more popular conversations around stress often highlight practices that can feel rudimentary and even more like another to-do on top of our already overwhelming to-do list. So let's face it, this perspective of stress is old, outdated, and it's not helping anyone. I say that being a huge proponent of meditation, deep breathing, therapeutic walks, and really all things self-care, especially around skincare. Like, love all of that stuff, drink all of that Kool-Aid, super hard. But those tools alone are not the only tools that I personally employ or encourage clients to employ. And I would argue that just talking about those tools alone is a stale conversation around the tools being the only way to manage stress. And this is really what can be keeping us in this stress spiral, or maybe even digging us deeper and making that word stress feel like such a trigger word. So today, we are going to share with you all about a new way to think about stress. So we're going to be diving into stress beyond just this psycho-emotional kind of mental stressors, and recognizing that stress has a physical and emotional factor that play a major role in our body's stress balance. Because when we expand our definition of stress and we understand stress in the body, we realize that there are so many more strategies that we can utilize to help to create more resilience in our body's experience of stress. So stress does not have to be a dirty word when you know what levers you can pull and press to restore your body's own resilience. And that is exactly what we are going to talk with you about today. So Jilly, you want to set the stage with what are we really talking about in the body when we talk about stress?
By now, you all know that Abby and I are obsessed with explaining the why behind things.
That's correct.
I'm, super excited to kind of dive into what the heck we're talking about when we're referring to, stress, the nervous system, the HPA axis. I feel strongly that it's empowering to understand the why, to know what's going on when we're talking about things like stress on a deeper level. So I want to just give you a little bit of background information here. First up, I want to talk about the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is the part of the nervous system that controls involuntary actions like breathing, heart rate, blood pressure. You can basically think about the autonomic nervous system as your automatic nervous system, because these things are kind of happening automatically without us having to consciously do anything or to direct the body in, kind of doing these things. The autonomic nervous system is made up of two branches or two main divisions that you have probably heard of before. We have our sympathetic system, which is often referred to as our fight or flight system. And we have our parasympathetic system, which is often referred to as the rest and digest system. These two systems or divisions of the nervous system basically work on a continuum. They work in conjunction together to manage the body's responses, kind of depending on the situation and really what the body needs in specific moments. Both of these divisions of the nervous system are super, super important, but we really need to maintain an appropriate balance here in order to actually preserve and protect long-term physical and emotional health. So now that we got the quick and dirty background on the autonomic nervous system, let's talk about the actual stress response piece, or the HPA axis, which I think many of you may have heard of also. If not, definitely tune in, and I'm going to kind of break it down for you here. So the HPA axis, or the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is the primary system that our body activates in times of stress. When the brain, specifically the amygdala or that fear center in the brain, senses or perceives something stressful, it sends signals or messengers to activate the HPA axis. This is where the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland in the brain and the adrenal glands, which sit on the top of the kidneys, are communicating together to activate a physiological stress response in the body that stimulates the production of stress hormones like cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine as a protective mechanism. This is where the body goes into that fight or flight mode, and the sympathetic nervous system really kicks in. This response to stress and the release of these stress hormones occurs to keep us alive, to keep us safe. And what this does is it increases things like blood pressure and blood sugar to keep up with the demands of the brain. So the body is kind of sending off the alarms, and it wants to prioritize these important organs and important systems that really, kind of protect us when it's exposed to a stressor. Once that stressor or threat is removed, there is a built-in negative feedback loop that will actually turn off the production of these stress hormones and signal to the brain that you are safe, you are okay, it's all good, and we get out of that stress response ideally. So that's kind of the background in terms of what the autonomic nervous system is. So those two divisions of the nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, and then what actually a stress response is. So now I just want to briefly describe the difference between an acute stress response and a chronic stress response. I really want to be clear here that a stress response is a normal and natural human physiological response. It's a good thing. We need to be able to mount a stress response to protect us. It's a built-in protective mechanism. But there is a major difference between an acute stress response and a chronic stress response. An acute stress response is a healthy stress response that occurs when the brain senses that stress or that threat. It activates the HPA axis, so that stress response when needed, and it turns it off when it doesn't need it. So the HPA axis goes into action during the acute stress, and then the stressor is removed or resolved, and we ideally go into that calm and more relaxed state, aka that rest and digest mode or that parasympathetic state. An example here would be if you are walking across the street and a car is running a red light and you see it driving past you and you stop in your tracks and you notice this big heat wave come over you in your body, your heart's racing, and your body kind of activated a stress response so that you would stop in your tracks and it would protect you. Or if you're camping in the woods and you see a bear, your body is going to see that acute stress or that acute threat. It's going to mobilize all those stress hormones, and ideally your body will kind of be put into action in terms of, responding in the way that it needs. Just as a couple very extreme examples. Do you have any examples that are better than mine, Abby?
Well, I think about that book that's like Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers.
Oh my gosh.
And it's essentially like zebras on the Sahara or wherever they live are like, when we see them just like hanging out, lounging around, like eating some grass or whatever zebras eat. And then a lion comes in and they're running to legitimately save their life. And that lion either gets tired and doesn't catch them or catches their friend. And that lion is like feasting on their friend and they're like lying down, chilling out, eating some more grass. Just like that was an acute stress response, which is, again, purposeful. Like we have this idea that all stress is bad. And that's a really important piece that you highlighted of like, this is a normal adaptation that we need to happen in the body. But we also have to come to the other side of it and realize that like lions exist and they might eat our friends, but like we still got to like chill out here and like eat some grass and digest it well and like move on with our lives. We are not zebras, thank God. And we don't have that situation so acutely. But I think very much like this is why zebras don't get ulcers and we do.
That's a beautiful example. Way better than mine. I'm just going to throw those in the trash. No, that's awesome. So you're getting the sense of what these acute stressors are, how they're necessary, they're healthy, they're adaptive, they keep us alive. So that's, kind of an acute, healthy stress response. But what can happen is an unhealthy stress response. And an unhealthy stress response occurs when the body is repeatedly assaulted by chronic stressors that lead to sustained HPA axis activation and essentially kind of getting stuck in fight or flight mode, or getting stuck, kind of predominantly in that sympathetic nervous system state. So to Abby's analogy, that might mean if the zebra is always being chased and never gets to stop and eat and rest and digest, or, that's probably another bad example on my end.
Or even just chronically worried about the potential for the lion to come and chase, like that idea of the perception of what we believe might be happening. And zebras, they don't have that. They're just like, they're either running or they're eating grass, hanging out. And it's like, we have a lot of this perception and buildup of past worries and future worries. And that's where the present moment is where we tend to, try to focus on with the meditation and things. And there's a lot of truth and beauty in that. But it's hard to separate ourselves from those worries sometimes.
Yeah. And I love how you said that. And, I think in terms of talking about the prolonged or chronic stress response, I think it's important to understand what that actually does to the body, right? So what's the problem with prolonged HPA axis activation? When your body is prioritizing that survival constantly, and it's not focused on just general maintenance and repair that needs to happen, this is not a good thing. When all of those stress hormones are mobilized, it's going to impair those maintenance activities that really keep things functioning optimally. Cortisol, in a chronic sense, is going to work to suppress non-essential functions like your immune system. It also shunts resources away from your metabolism. It impacts thyroid function, and it even impacts fertility in a variety of ways. One big one being we can often see the decline in sex hormone production, particularly with things like progesterone that are needed in adequate amounts to support implantation in a healthy pregnancy. Research has even shown that stress can actually alter the composition, function, and metabolic activity of the gut microbiome in a big way. An immediate sense to what Abby had just mentioned about the zebras, enjoying and digesting grass. If, cortisol is present and we're kind of in that sympathetic state, we're not going to be able to break down and digest nutrients from food optimally. In a stress response, cortisol is going to mobilize glucose. Remember blood sugar? It's going to disrupt blood sugar and it's going to cause elevations. And that can increase the risk for a variety of problems that we discussed in episode 2. And that chronic stress response can also increase the risk for mood disorders like anxiety and depression. All of that to say, constant exposure to stress can result in a lot of issues, and it has systemic implications for all the systems in the body, really as a whole. The body ultimately is just not designed to be in that chronic stress response, and it will start to adapt and compensate if it's chronically under duress. You can do all the things in the world to address your gut health, your hormone issues, but if stress is persistent and you are living in that chronic state of fight or flight, you will likely hit a ceiling on your healing journey in terms of the amount of progress that you can make with resolving symptoms.
That is so important. And that I think is something that Jillian and I see all too often of someone that is doing all the things right. Quite frankly, sometimes it's those of us that are, and I say us because I have a propensity for this, and I think Jilly does too, to be wired in like that type A, never doing enough, always extending and kind of almost overextending ourselves, doing all the things, being like the A+ student, like this, that, and the other thing. And then in this perpetual, like, I can't get over my gut symptoms. I can't get over my hormone symptoms. I can't get over my chronic colds or my muscle injuries or, skin conditions, what have you. And the missing piece is that you are overextending, you are overdoing, and it's not just do less, but like, let's really be more thoughtful about the things that we invite in to actually help us to slow down, but slow down in a very educated way. And that's what we're going to dive into.
That's what we are going to dive into. So quickly also too, just want to mention some signs to look for in terms of if your body is in that prolonged stress response or if you are chronically exposed to stressors. And I want to preface this by saying that we would never go off of just symptoms alone if we were working with a client one-on-one in terms of evaluating for issues with cortisol or the adrenals. We will always do testing to look at cortisol and adrenal function specifically with clients in practice in conjunction with evaluating symptoms. But these are some things that you might look out for or that might indicate that the body has been stuck in that prolonged stress response and it's it's kind of getting towards that burnout state. So some common things that we will see include things like chronic cravings for sugar, carbohydrates, salt. And I don't mean just like, ooh, that, I'm in the mood to enjoy something sweet, or, I enjoy foods that are salty. I'm talking more kind of intense cravings for sugar, carbs, salt. Poor exercise tolerance or low exercise tolerance is a great indicator of being in that burnout state or chronic stress. The inability to build muscle, visceral or abdominal fat accumulation, moodiness, irritability, feeling overwhelmed, low motivation, brain foggy. Getting sick a lot is a big one, since there's that suppression of the immune system and also frequent infection. So it could be things like yeast infections, UTIs, all sorts of things. Ultimately, when stress has been going on for a long time, the immune system really, really takes a big hit. And this is why stress even plays a huge role with things like autoimmunity. And Abby is now going to talk a little bit about the different types of stress and, the different types of stressors out there to look for. But these are just some common, kind of symptoms or signs that you can pay attention to that might indicate that, this is a really important foundational episode for you to take in and take action with.
So stress is more than just our worries. And in fact, there's kind of 3 distinct types of stressors that can impact the resilience of our nervous system. And that's really what Jilly was talking about with the HPA axis. And these include emotional stressors, physical stressors, and environmental stressors. So our first, we'll kind of dive into emotional stressors. And this is most likely the category that we're all most familiar with when we hear the word stress. This might be our thoughts, our worries, our feelings, more of our mental, emotional experience of stress. This is also the category that we might feel the least in control of when it comes to stress as life happens. And sometimes those life moments are hard and they are stressful. So this is when we get to benefit from there not only being one category of stress. So we can actually look at this in a positive sense, because when one category gets heavier with stressors, we actually can start to invite in more supportive strategies into the other categories to help disperse the stress load and thus create more resilience in our bodies as we move through those challenging life moments. But we have to start with that awareness. So this is where the symptoms that Jilly was talking about and this just self-awareness of where we are in our life and what's going on is really important to always first assess our mindset, our awareness, kind of where are we to move forward. So that brings us into stress category number 2, which are physical stressors. So this refers to the body's availability of resources to help abundantly fuel the body to more successfully move through stressors or restore and repair the depletions that stress can cause. So in short, we are either alleviating physical stressors through our physical behaviors, or we are creating stress through our physical behaviors. Not all of those are negative or positive in the way they might sound. So let's put them into context with some examples here. So some of which you've already heard us dive into these at length. So I'll be brief, but optimal intake of calories and macronutrients. How did we get here again? This is shocking. But are you underfueling? Are you underfueling for the amount of physical movement that you're performing? Are you undereating protein or carbohydrates for the demand that your body has, particularly maybe around physical activity? Undereating is a stressor. That's what it is. And this is why we are so adamant about ensuring that we are properly fueling, because it impacts the resilience of our nervous system and thus impacts if we can achieve vitality in our body or not. Blood sugar. Are we eating regularly timed meals that are robust in calories, protein, and fiber that help to prevent the highs and the lows of that blood sugar roller coaster? Because remember, we want to be on the caterpillar ride. This is the goal, as the highs and the lows of the loop-de-loop roller coaster are massive stressors on the body. So these might be things that we haven't thought about before: under eating, blood sugar, sleep quality, and quantity. This one might not fall too far in terms of what we might think are stressors, but we really want to be thinking about, are we creating the opportunity and the environment for deep and restorative sleep? So lack of quality and quantity of sleep is a stressor. So now we're starting to get this idea of this theoretical stress bucket. And all of these things that are going into it, we're like, oh, okay, our sleep's been crappy. Like, oh, my blood sugar, highs and lows. I'm totally not optimizing protein and fiber. Oh, I'm completely under eating, and I have been for years. And all of a sudden, we're looking at this stress bucket, this theoretical stress bucket in the body. And then we realize, oh, we had a really tough family relationship or something happened. in our lives that, wow, that feels like a lot of mental, emotional stress. And all of a sudden, our stress bucket, the water level, is at the very tippity top. So one more stressor, and we might start to have an overflow. And those are often the symptoms that we are experiencing, the overwhelm and dysfunction of the nervous system. So that might take us to movement and exercise. Exercise is a stressor on the body. It can certainly be a beneficial stressor at that, but only when it is done in balance with the body and the many other factors that are at play. So come back to the stress bucket, if you're overwhelmed at work, if you're skipping meals, if you're sleeping 5 hours per night and you're not minding your blood sugar, doing that 45-minute spin class every day or some other massively high intensity, heavy workout is going to be just another stressor that could potentially put us out of balance and start to overflow that stress bucket. So it is our responsibility to see the balance of our stressors and to make the appropriate adjustments when necessary.
We spoke about this a little bit, I think, in both the first and second episode, in terms of context is king. And assessing the context in which you are incorporating a diet or lifestyle strategy is the most important thing at the end of the day. And what Abby's really saying is exercise is healthy, but it's only healthy in the right context, right? It's the same thing with something like vegetables, non-starchy vegetables. They're wildly nutritious, nutrient dense, full of fiber, antioxidants, all the things. But if we're under eating and our plate is so full of non-starchy vegetables, but it's lacking all of the other things, it's lacking enough calories, that really isn't a super healthy behavior anymore, right? And I love the point that Abby made about, recognizing when emotional stressors are higher. That is so, so key. And I think this is something that we often see clients struggling with in practice is, really kind of approaching certain diet and lifestyle behaviors with rigidity or, making these things very emotionally charged. And I think it's so important to recognize that, okay, there's emotional stress going on in my life or work stress, like Abby mentioned. And maybe that means today I should just go on a big walk, listen to some music and do something gentle and supportive, because throwing gasoline on the fire with a HIIT workout or a spin class, it's not going to be healthy or supportive or adaptive. It's actually just going to contribute or amplify that stress response and the symptoms that come along with it.
Yeah, that piece of being kind of flexible and then listening, hearing, and adjusting kind of accordingly. So huge. And certainly something that, we've moved through in our lives as well and continue to move through on a day-to-day basis, really paying attention. The other is infection. And this is another that I'm going to mention here, certainly because we can think of infections such as a cold or a flu as a stressor, and that runs us down. That's totally true. So again, if we're feeling like a rundown, we've got a little bit of a cold, again, going for that, doing a longer fast in our intermittent fasting, probably not going to be helpful. Doing a really intense workout, probably not going to be helpful. Those are the times that we want to be kind of more mindful. But this also can extend to infections to chronic ailments, such as digestive symptoms, chronic skin conditions, persistent aches and pains, fatigue, other signs and symptoms in the body that there might be too much stress or even maybe an imbalance in our gut microbiome or potential pathogen that's contributing to these chronic symptoms. So this is not necessarily something that we have direct control over, but these are the types of dynamics that Jillian and I work with in our programs and our practices. And these dynamics often stem from the body being overwhelmed with other stressors and experiencing that low immune response in response to that high stress, in that physiological high stress, and as a result, kind of allow for some of these imbalances to emerge. So just more information for us to recognize those two can be physical stressors. Hi, Abby here, and I wanted to check in with you all about your gut health. Are you ready to heal your gut, eliminate digestive symptoms, and experience better energy, clear skin, and improved focus? You might be surprised to discover the one thing holding you back is something that affects every system in the body. But if you're like every client I've worked with, you've not heard about it before. And unless you address this one key body process, no diet, supplement, or lifestyle change will have the lasting impact you want. That one system is your drainage system. And I'll teach you exactly what you need to do to get that system functioning again in my free training, so you can finally heal your gut and eliminate those frustrating energy, skin, and brain fog symptoms once and for all. So if you're ready, sign up for the free drainage system training through the link in our show notes or go to AboveHealthNutrition.com, and it's right at the top of our homepage. All right, and then our third category is environmental stressors. So this category is referring to the stressors from the environment around us that burden our body's detoxification system and can overload the body, kind of causing ill health symptoms and kind of act as stressors. So some of the examples of environmental stressors can include kind of chemicals and synthetic ingredients, things in fragrances, candles, air fresheners, makeup, skincare, personal care products, laundry detergents, cleaning products. That list can extend well beyond those categories. These also can be chemicals and pollution in water, air, and our food system and food products, light pollution and overexposure to blue light from technology, something that we talked a lot about in our first episode and certainly more. We can even talk about EMF exposure and the lack of exposure to fresh air and nature and natural light that help to actually organize the exposures that we get from technology. So this category can sometimes feel probably the most overwhelming, especially if we're just learning about this. So we will absolutely be sharing and going into much more depth on how to navigate moving into alleviating some of the stress from our environment because it is a big category. So this is, again, a place to be aware of. Probably don't start here. Start with the sleep. Start with the eating. Start with getting curious about your movement. Start with some of those more tangible things that maybe feel more familiar. I know this is more of a conversation, thankfully, today than it has been, years ago when Jillian and I started in practice. And it was, kind of really popping the bubble on some of these uncomfy things to bring up in people's lives, but they do act as stressors. So when we think about stress, I think it can feel gloom and doom. But one of the things that we really work so hard to help our clients shift their mindset is that our bodies have an amazing capacity for resilience. And Jillian and I talk a lot about this word resilience in reference to stress. And that is what we want to create the mantra of from this episode forward is that you are resilient in the face of stress. And these are the tools. And Jilly, can you tell us a little bit more about what do we mean when we say resilience in the face of stress?
Yes, and I love the topic of stress resilience and just resilience in the body in general. There is nothing worse, in my opinion, than the recommendation to just stress less, reduce your stress. It makes my blood boil. Yes, it's super important to get honest with yourself, to evaluate your stressors and the different things that are filling up your personal stress bucket. But it might not be possible or realistic for many of us to completely remove or even, modify in a significant way some of the stressors in our lives. And this is where the stress resilience piece really comes in. Stress resilience is the concept of improving and supporting your body's ability to adapt and respond to stress and improving your ability to self-regulate. So in addition to evaluating your stress load or your allostatic load and considering where you can make adjustments, there are so many things that you can do to actually improve your body's response to stress and to improve your resilience and how you actually adapt to the presence of stress. Like Abby mentioned, this is really what we like to focus on with clients. And over time, it can make a tremendous difference on a client's hormone and gut health healing journey. First up, in terms of talking about resilience, we have to hone in on the fundamentals. Are you sick of us saying that word yet? So just running through a list of the fundamentals that we'd recommend focusing on right off the bat, which we cover in the first two episodes. Eating enough, making sure you're not kind of chronically low-grade under-eating, balancing blood sugar, getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep ideally, balanced movement, so not overdoing it, not underdoing it, kind of finding that Goldilocks situation, supporting circadian rhythms and the light exposure. So those are kind of the core foundational things that I would assess in terms of supporting stress resilience. If one or several of these things are out of balance, your stress resilience will decrease. And over time, this can create issues. So start there, and then you can move into kind of more specifics that Abby, you can kind of touch on in terms of how to really support stress resilience from there.
Yeah. So kind of referring these to as our advanced takeaways on more stress resilience. So one of our favorites are minerals. And minerals are charged compounds. So they're most notably potassium, magnesium, and sodium are kind of the three major players, but they play a huge role in maintaining resilience in the face of stress. So stress and minerals can actually create a little bit of a vicious cycle when minerals are low and or stress is high, or Both. Having low mineral stores in the body is stressful, and higher stress in the body burns through minerals. So we can kind of see how this like spinning hamster wheel can kind of spin away from resilience if we have low mineral stores or low mineral intake and high stress or chronic stress. So the best practice to relieve stress is really to restore minerals and then continue to highlight their presence in our diet and our lifestyles to help us to have the tools to maintain the resilience in our physiological body. So, an additional challenge, unfortunately, is due to our poor quality of our soils and over farming practices that I won't get on a soapbox about. But we now have low minerals in foods because there's low minerals in our soils. So, it does make relying on just diet alone a little more challenging as a resource for abundant mineral intake. So, we want to be highlighting mineral rich foods. And we're going to jump into the laundry list of those in a moment. One more for the challenging conversations. It's not always as easy to just test for minerals using conventional tests, such as those we might get from the primary care physician, as these tests typically only measure magnesium in our serum, which really only equates to about 1% of magnesium stores in the body and really just is a poor reflection of magnesium stores in general. So if we are to measure magnesium, we need to measure what's called red blood cell levels to get the deeper insight into if we're experiencing some degree of magnesium deficiency. And really, it's suspected that about 75% of US adults are magnesium deficient, which honestly might even be a radically underestimated number. So, blanket statement here, and we don't make a lot of these, but we can pretty much operate under the assumption that more magnesium and minerals in general would do us all a huge service and is a great place to start from kind of intake of foods. And even we're going to mention some supplements that really can help to restore mineral levels so we can really work with the body in the face of stress. All right, so for our favorite list of stress supporting foods, we've got a couple heavy hitters. So we've got liver. It's the best food-based multivitamin that we can get. We can eat it. We can take it in supplement form. Liver is amazing. Shellfish. So we're talking about oysters, shrimp, mussels. The list goes on. Vitamin C rich foods. Our adrenals love vitamin C. Citrus fruits, cauliflower, bananas, bell peppers, kiwi. Mineral rich salts. So these are salts that are not refined. So they include their trace minerals. And they're also providing sodium for the body. Sodium is not a bad nutrient mineral. We need it. And we especially need it in balance with potassium. So that's where minerals as a family come in. We love like Redmond salt, Celtic salt, Himalayan sea salt. Those are more mineral rich salts. Fiber rich starches, root vegetables, carrots, beets, parsnips, potatoes, sweet potatoes, oats. The list goes on. Those are the slower burning carbohydrates that help to balance our cortisol, our stress hormone, and really help with necessary optimal thyroid health. Fatty fish for its anti-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acids, so it helps to balance inflammation in the body, and certainly stress can be inflammatory. Seaweeds for their rich mineral content. And this is also a category where we do love to utilize some supplements, especially in the face of high stress and convenience. Like we can't forget about convenience here. So these can include kind of electrolyte mixes that serve as more concentrated sources. So some of our favorites, LMNT packets, Optimal Electrolytes by Seeking Health, and the coconut water-based mineral powders by Bumbleroot. Big fans.
There are also lots of lifestyle tools that you can utilize for improving stress resilience and for getting your body into a more relaxed parasympathetic state as well. This might include things like breathwork, guided meditation, yoga, or simply activities that are pleasurable, like reading, social time with friends or family. And we've touched on these things a little bit in terms of mentioning that sometimes they're the only things talked about in relation to, stress outlets or stress reduction. And we don't want to discredit them because these things are very important for getting the body into that relaxed state. But what Abby and I are really talking about is the need for the combination of these things together. And I just think it's important, again, to reiterate that in our modern society, getting into that parasympathetic state, it's really an active, ongoing practice. It's not, like you just turn a switch. So my first recommendation in terms of lifestyle pieces would be to remind yourself that rest is productive. It sounds really silly, but in a society that does applaud burnout, one of the most important steps or mindset shifts that you can make for improving your adrenal health and balancing your stress response system is to really work towards viewing productivity as slowing down and as an investment in your current and future health. In terms of some action steps here, outside of the mindset shift, consider creating small outlets of recovery for your body during the day. If you're currently operating in a state of chronic fight or flight, even carving out just a few minutes a couple times a day to incorporate one of those practices that I mentioned can make a huge difference. I recommend really actively carving out, protecting, booking the time on your calendar for these things. We can't expect ourselves to remember to do these things out of thin air when we're all super busy and have crazy schedules. And that could mean even blocking the 2 minutes on your calendar to take a pause, check in with your body, and do a 2-minute breathwork exercise. We really need these external reminders. Consider starting off by maybe bookending your day with some nervous system support. And, then maybe working towards carving out a small midday break. Consider habit stacking. So that means if you've already created a habit around one thing, you could stack another habit right on top of that, and it's going to make it a lot easier to engage in that new thing. I love using meal times as an opportunity to create a pause, since ideally most of us are now eating 3 well-rounded meals a day. This is a beautiful opportunity to manage stress versus, a reaction to stress. So we can shut down the computer, we can check in with the body, and maybe we take a few slow, deep belly breaths to activate that rest and digest mode prior to eating. Ultimately, getting into that parasympathetic state and improving stress resilience is that active, ongoing process. It needs to be realistic, intentional, and it really has to feel genuine to you. If you don't like meditation, don't do meditation. Find something that feels good for you, and it may require a little bit of experimentation. Pick one thing at a time, give it a go and see how it feels. Then layer on the next thing. And you will likely be amazed by how these small habits, small outlets of recovery really support the nervous system and can help with aiding in healing physical symptoms. And I just want to share a little personal story here. Abby and I will dive into our own personal health stories in future episodes this season to give you all the dirty details there. But stress was definitely a big part of my own personal health journey. And several years ago, I actually wore a heart rate monitor that was measuring my heart rate variability for 3 days. Slept with it on, worked with it on, did all the things. And just to take a step back, if you're not familiar with what heart rate variability is, or HRV, HRV is literally the variance in time between the beats of your heart rate variability. So HRV naturally decreases during stress when elevated sympathetic nervous system activity is working to support the body and to keep up with the demands of stress. So when the body is in an active stress response or in that fight or flight, we will see HRV, or heart rate variability, decrease or be low. So low heart rate variability is actually associated with poor stress resilience. And I wore this heart rate monitor for 3 days. This was a time in my life where I was, doing all the things, running, intense workouts, all the things that on paper are very healthy, working a ton, and just very busy kind of lifestyle at the time. And when I got my data back, I was a little bit surprised to see how low my HRV was, and that I was kind of living in the red all day, meaning I was really dominantly in that sympathetic state all day long. And this was, shocking to me. But then when I really thought about it, I realized that, I'm just going through my day. And I was definitely an individual that felt like I needed to be checking something off the to-do list in order to feel productive. And, at that time, workouts were really a big outlet for me. And Abby and I've had some conversations about the fact, and we talk with clients a lot about the fact that workouts can't be your only stress outlet. They can be an outlet, but they shouldn't be the only one. Anyway, so I, living in the red, and decided that I was going to start to create those small outlets of recovery for my body. And this literally started with doing, very short bouts of breath work or guided meditation that I would, do in my office in between clients, like once a day to start. And I did this consistently, and I sort of built upon this over time. And the improvements in not only HRV, but how my body was physically feeling, my mood, my energy, my sleep, my adaptation to stress, and how I felt I could respond to stress improved wildly just by creating those small outlets and committing to, that 2 minutes of breath work in between client sessions. It really accumulated over time. And I saw that in the actual data, which was really cool.
That's so impactful. And this could be, breath work isn't your thing. Could it be a 5-minute walk around the block? Could it be like just walking around the office or your home or something and kind of focusing on taking a couple deep breaths? Like, doesn't have to be intense. I mean, I do something that I daringly call napitation, where when I can, I will take 5 to 30 minutes and actually like lie down. I work from home, so I have a little bit, of an ability to do that and do a meditation. Sometimes I do fall asleep, which is why I lovingly put the nap in front of it. And I find that when I do that in my days, especially between like heavy client days in the morning and maybe more, different creative outlets in the afternoon, like I am so much more of a productive person. So thereby taking the 5 minutes or the 30 minutes, whatever my day has, I actually massively increase my productivity. But part of that's also like saying it on this podcast, like calling out my shadow of like, I might take a glorified nap most days of the week. Like, let it be
And
known.
you're able to show up more fully and more productively for yourself, for your clients because of that. But it's often uncomfortable to scale back a little bit or to give yourself that permission. And, I think everyone has different things that really serve the nervous system and fill up their own cup or kind of help to balance that stress bucket. It's a matter of finding what it is and prioritizing the time, even if it's 2 minutes.
Absolutely. And that kind of caters into our last point about kind of addiction to stress hormone. So, this is where for some people who have been in this high stress environment chronically, their nervous system can become kind of dysregulated and essentially get stuck in this overstressed sympathetic or fight or flight mode. And it can even feel uncomfortable for those people to get into that calmer parasympathetic state, that rest and digest state, because it has gotten so entrenched by that burnout, the demands that they have put on their body. So this can feel like someone who needs to work out to feel energized, which is actually a false sense of energy for some people, as they will often later hit a wall or crash either later that day or that night because they're really just kind of running on fumes. So we can often see these dynamics in people who are overusing stress stimulated practices or products such as over caffeination, over fasting, over exercising, that go, go, go hustle productivity culture that is so dominant today, and really where we do need to recognize that stress is part of our productivity. And this can also be someone who identifies as someone who needs to constantly have distractions. They can't sit with their own thoughts. They can't sit still. They always have to be moving. And sometimes we can wear that as like a badge of pride because it is productive. It is, we just never stop. We never slow down. But if we're being, really honest with ourselves, maybe there is this degree of I can't slow down because then I might never get up again. And that ability to really start to look at these as signs to really plug into your stress balance. So start to take an audit of the stressors that we discussed above. How many do you tick off? And then how many of the stress balancing practices are you actively practicing? And if that answer is a lot that I tick off and none that I'm practicing, let's start somewhere. So start slow. Maybe the first start by welcoming in some stress supporting practices. Don't feel like you have to give up all these things. Start by inviting something in. And it could be like Jillian was saying, 2 minutes of breath work. Could be that 5-minute walk around the block. This is a great opportunity to bring in maybe a mineral powder, like we mentioned, like some of the food-based things of loading up your plate or mixing a mineral powder in with your water. Are you drinking water? Might be a question that we might lead with too. Really go slow. And even repleting minerals, we want to kind of go slow too. And just start somewhere, but always start slow. We don't need to pull the rug out from under ourselves to make a tremendous difference. It can be the 2 minutes, the one thing that we include, and then start to really pull the thread from there about what can really give some way in your life.
I love that. And if you can't tell, the theme today is really start slow. Take it slow and just be thoughtful, create awareness, and take things at your own pace. We don't want to create more stress with the stress to-do list or stress outlet to-do list. So to wrap up today, let's just debunk a couple stress myths that we, kind of hear from clients often. The first one is that stress is all in your head. Now we know that there are lots of components of the brain that are actually involved with, the stress response and, kind of protecting us and keeping us safe. But stress is systemic. It has systemic effects on the body. we feel things physically. The entire body and every system in the body is reacting, and, different hormones and compounds are being mobilized when we are sensing stress. So if someone says that stress is all in your head, yes, the brain is part of that, and stress can be emotional, but we also know that stress involves all systems, and stress can also be physical, it can be environmental, and it's really important to look at stress holistically.
Yeah, thinking about those things that, we're all eating. We have to eat. So we can really focus on what we're eating, how much we're eating, the combinations of foods that we're eating. You can start to do those stress practices in the behaviors that you're already doing. We just start to get a little bit better at them and better at supporting and knowing that that is actually in our toolkit of our stress responses. And speaking of our toolkit, the idea that, Jill, you kind of touched on this, is meditation the only tool for stress?
It is not. It is not. And if you've been here for this episode, I hope that's a takeaway for you, in that meditation is amazing. And we have great data supporting how this can help with really, rewiring the nervous system and supporting that stress resilience. But it's just one tool. There's so many tools out there, emotional tools, physical tools, lots of things. And it's important to really, start from where you're at today, assess what is going to have the most impact, grab for the low-hanging fruit, I always like to say. And meditation, it's not the only thing. It's just one of the things.
We can all find our stress language.